So today I wanted to spend time with you guys to kind of walk through what is behavior change, what are we talking about when we talk about specifically not just behavior change but social marketing, which may be familiar to some of you, may not. We'll get into that. And then I'm going to go over some specific strategies and tools that you can use in your own outreach programming to better enable change. So I'd love to get a sense of, a big part of what I do is learning about the audience that I'm working with on the program. So I'd love to get a better sense from you guys, both kind of backgrounds and then also if anyone is working on any behavior type projects or if you're trying to solicit change with your audience. So let's, first of all, like who here is part of a watershed group, nonprofit, that sort of field? Great, so probably about a third or so. What about government, local government, state, federal? We've got some government folks. What about students and teachers, maybe education broadly? Okay, cool. Who else am I missing? What other?
Consultants who want to get their clients to do the right thing.
Consultants, that like me. Yeah, who else? Other consultants? Other businesses? Okay, that sounds like it's about everyone. And then who here, what kind of actions, if you guys, I imagine you're somewhat interested in behavior if you're here. So what kind of actions are you trying to encourage among your audience? Yeah, Michael.
Recycling plastics in a elementary, middle school setting.
All right, I like that. Specific, you have your audience and you have a specific even type of thing to recycle. What else?
Stormwater management initiatives, rain gardens, rain barrels, incorporating those things into our community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Acceptance.
Yeah, and some of those, and that's a lot of a number of behaviors, and some are, as you know, are easier or harder to get people to do. Sometimes they can be, a rain barrel can potentially be a gateway to a garden. We'll touch on that a little bit. Anyone else? Yeah.
Alternative to pesticides and herbicides in community gardening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pesticides, herbicides. I'm working on a project now, kind of looking, at kind of residential use of pesticides. One more? Yeah.
Floodplain management, trying to keep clients in the frame of no adverse impact either to adjoining properties or to bodies of water that are nearby and also to the aquifers, making sure they're clean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, yeah, touching on all of those, knowing who your audience is, which is something we've kind of already defined, and then knowing that what they're doing is having an impact is really important. That's great, guys. So as we kind of go through this, if you have projects you're working on, it helps to kind of think of everything I'm talking about. I will give examples, but it helps to think about it in terms of what you're working on as well. Awesome. Cool. All right, so let's jump into it. So first off, we're talking about behavior change. What do we mean and what don't we mean when we are talking about behavior change? First of all, I like to talk about what it's not, okay? So it's not simply about creating awareness, increasing knowledge, or changing attitudes. Although all these things are important and can often play a role in behavior. I'm not saying that, my background's in environmental education, so I'm not saying that that's not crucial in many cases, but it's not the only thing. What we're really talking about when we get down to it is changing people's actions, right? Not just letting people know the effect that dog poop can have on our water quality, but actually getting people to pick it up, right? Not always glamorous, but that's what we're talking about. So I like to look at this in terms of what I call behavior change myths or misperceptions about behavior. So this first one is this idea of understanding, okay? Like I said earlier, just because I have an understanding about a certain issue, that doesn't mean that I'm always going to take action on that, right? I know that I should, for example, to use less, I currently live in California, so I know that we're coming out of a drought. I really should take shorter showers. I should turn off the water when I'm brushing my teeth, all these things. I have that knowledge, yet I don't always do it. Maybe it's less convenient, maybe I forget, whatever it might be, okay? Sort of similar with care and concern. I know everyone in this room, I would imagine, is concerned about climate change and sees that as a very real issue and is probably thinking about your individual impact on the climate and carbon emissions. yet. You know, do we all always carpool or take public transportation to work? No, sometimes we drive. Sometimes that's the only thing that we can do. Sometimes it's just because of our schedules and timing, that's what we do, right? So you have care and concern, but we know that doesn't always lead to action. And this last one is appeal to fear and guilt. I feel like we're seeing this a little bit less in the environmental field than, like, say 10 years ago, you know? Like, so seeing a lot of these images, like the polar bears and the melting ice caps, kind of these images that make us say, oh my gosh, like that's terrible. The fact is the research doesn't necessarily support eliciting feelings of fear and guilt to encourage action. You know, the opposite is actually true. I mean, I know even if I turn on the TV and I see a commercial trying to get me to, you know, donate to an abused animal by showing images of that, you know, my reaction is to turn the channel, right? Not necessarily to whip out my wallet. I think, and I don't just think, the research is the same is true for emotions. So rather than, you know, eliciting these negative emotions, positive emotions are really what get people to open up and to try new things. There are some exceptions if you give people, as long as you give people like what the action kind of item at the end there, but when in doubt, just stick with positive emotions, okay? So keep these kind of myths in mind as you think about how to develop outreach programs. So social marketing. So when I say social marketing, I'm not talking about social media. That can get confused sometimes for people. So social marketing is, unlike traditional marketing, whose end goal is to get you to purchase something, social marketing's end goal is social good or betterment of society. So this chart here, I like to look at this. This is looking at kind of what we call the theory of diffusion, or how behaviors spread across a community or an audience, okay? So you have the people that are considered your innovators and your early adopters. If I touch that, it's gonna like move. Innovators and early adopters, that's 16%, we have them on the far left. Those are people that are gonna do a new behavior right away. Those are people, probably like many in this room for environmental behaviors, that information and education, sure, that might be all you need to do a new action, right? If I tell you that, you know, give you information about the impact that, let's say, planting a non-native plant in your yard is going to have on habitat and water quality, that might be all you need. That's not most people though, okay? Then on the far right, we have what we call the laggards, that's the other 16%. And those people that like are not gonna do the new behavior until like they absolutely have to, right? Until there's like a law that's requiring them to do it, or they get a fine for it. Basically, they're gonna be the kind of the make-me people, they're gonna be forced to do it. Most people fall into this middle category, the early and late majority, 68%. And those are the people where these social marketing techniques that I'm going to talk about today are going to work. They're people that like might be a little interested in the thing you're trying to get them to do, but need a little more help, a little more of a nudge, if you will, to get to that point. Okay, so I kind of introduced social marketing a little bit, but essentially it's a process that applies marketing principles and techniques to influence behaviors that benefit society as well as the people you're working with. So, and that can be, you know, traditionally social marketing has come from more of like a public health field, right? So getting people to lose weight or stop smoking. But in recent years, well, really honestly the last 20, 30 years, it's moved into the environmental field, and that's kind of where I specialize. So here's some examples, and these are just the like advertising pieces of it, so it's not everything, but this is kind of what we think of when we think of social marketing. So this was from the New York City Department of Health and Hygiene, I think, and getting people to drink less soda. Pretty clever. This was from a dock in San Francisco, actually, is where I'm currently living. I'm from Reading, so people were like, what are you doing here? I'm from Reading, and I've worked with a lot of Delaware and Chesapeake Bay folks, but I'm currently based in San Francisco. But this is a clever way to get people to stop littering cigarette butts using humor. And this is from Washington State, from their Water Quality Consortium, to change fertilizer use habits. Okay, so those are some examples of social marketing, and an approach that I use a lot is called community-based social marketing, which pretty much is what it sounds like. There's this guy, Doug Mackenzie Moore. I don't know if is anyone familiar with community-based social marketing? Have you heard of it? You should definitely check it out. So this book that he wrote, this Fostering Sustainable Behavior, is available free on his website. What's his website? I think it's probably CBSM. Usually this goes by cbsm.com or .org. Search for it. Or I can send it to you if you email me. But he uses this 5-step approach that basically walks you through how to encourage a particular sustainable behavior and environmental behavior in a target audience. And what I'm going to talk about today is very close to this. I use more of a 6-step approach with a slightly heavier emphasis on evaluation. So in a minute, I'm going to walk you guys through these 6 steps. I'm going to pay a special attention to steps 3 and 4, because I see these as kind of the cornerstones of social marketing. And when I get to step 4, when I go through specific strategies, I'll be asking you guys for examples of how you might be using that strategy in any programs you're working on. So kind of, again, as we go through, it helps to kind of think of specific programs that you may be currently working on. Okay. So here are our 6 steps. So our first one, background, purpose, and goal setting. So this is basically getting a sense of what you're doing, what your program is really about. What led you to want to develop this campaign in the first place? It might seem pretty simple, but before you can kind of jump into social marketing, you really have to have specific goals. So say our issue is a decrease in native plants. We were just talking in the keynote about native plants. So say, we're seeing a decrease in native plants in our watershed. We're seeing an impact of that on native habitat. We're seeing a decrease in water quality as a result. So we know this is what we want, more native plants. That's kind of what we're thinking about broadly. Once you kind of understand your background, you want to go into your purpose. What's this campaign's potential impact? So, if I were to get people or organizations to plant more native plants, what would I hope would happen as a result? Right? Because again, we want to always be thinking ahead, right? So in this case, we're saying, well, I would hope to see an increase in habitat for X species. Maybe getting as specific as possible is always better. I hope to see these improvements in water quality, and then getting to be even more specific, defining your goals. Has anyone heard of SMART goals before? I'm sure you guys have heard this. So right, when you're writing your goals, you want to create goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. So I don't want to just say, I want people to plant more trees, right? I want to be specific about the type of plants that they're planting, perhaps how many. Maybe I want to say I want, the number of native plants to increase by, 15% over the next 3 years. Whatever that might be, you want to be as specific as possible. Why might this be? Why do I want specific goals? Anyone?
Because you can measure.
Exactly, because they're measurable. And that's all, we are constantly trying to, I know you guys in your work, and we were just talking about doing other measurements in our streams and things like that, but every time you're doing this kind of work, you can't know if you're successful unless you're measuring it. So creating your goals at the very start, you can change them later, but coming up with them in the beginning is always going to be a good idea. So moving on to step 2, once I have my understanding of my goals, this is where I get into those specific behaviors I was talking about. So again, you want to be specific, but I want you to think about 2 things when you come up with which actions you want your target audience to do. You want those actions to be non-divisible, which means I can't break them down into more than one action. So I wouldn't just say plant native plants. I would say what type of specific plant, right? And I wouldn't just say install water-saving devices broadly. I would probably say get people to put on low-flow shower heads and faucet aerators, right? So kind of, and the reason for this we'll get into in step 3 is that there are different barriers and motivators depending on the behavior. Like we know that there's different barriers for installing a rain barrel than there is for installing a native garden, right? So non-divisible and end state. So end state means that by doing this behavior, they will be as close as possible to doing what you want them to do, right? So I don't want my behavior to be purchase a rain barrel, because then you're gonna have a bunch of people with rain barrels in their backyard that are not installed, right? So you want to just, again, think about what you actually want them to do. Of course, we need to somehow be able to measure that, so that you got to keep that in mind. It's easier to measure purchase than install, but if you can find out if they installed it, that's going to be better. And then 4 things to consider, and this comes from the community-based social marketing I was talking about earlier, so if you want more details about these, there's a whole formula that he uses, Doug Mackenzie Moore uses. I just want you to think about it. Impact, right? So the impact on our goal, which you're probably going to do that anyway. So like the impact on native plant, or sorry. So for the native plant example, it'd be like the impact on what X water quality measure. Probability is how likely is it that your audience is even going to do that behavior. This is an important one, right? If they're not going to want to install rain barrels, if that's not something they're likely to do, then that's probably not a great behavior. And you can find out this information by doing surveys or talking to your audience in some capacity. Penetration is how many people in your audience are already doing the action. What if everyone's already doing the action? Well, that's not a good action to target, right? So you need to know what people in your target audience are already doing. And then applicability does that action even apply to people in your audience? So I was working on this project. We were looking at different energy saving actions, and we were talking about line drying your clothes, right? So we're saying, well, not using a dryer, that's something we should see the, and it had like a pretty good impact, and most people weren't doing it, but it turns out it didn't apply to most people because it was in an area where it was mostly multi-family housing. So people didn't have yards or areas where they could put a line. So if the action is not something most people can do, then that's not going to be terribly impactful.
If you go back to impact, when you think about the impact of a single rain barrel, if you think about that compared to your roof and your driveway, you would say it's not worth doing. You have to go back and think through whether or not this is really going to have an impact on the problem. And rain barrels are kind of are nice markers of interest, but not particularly effective ways of controlling the problem.
Yeah.
So thinking that through determines whether the action is really worth doing or not.
Exactly. Yeah. Impact. So the formula that this guy uses, I think that he gives, because these all more or less equal weight. But yeah, impact. If that's not, I think it's like on a scale of 1 to 100. If that's not high, it's probably not going to be agreed. It's probably not going to be worth it. There's some actions that surprise you. You're like, oh, the impact's not high, but if everyone can do it and it's really easy for everyone to do it, it might be higher. But yeah, and that's something you're going to need to look at, the academic research behind, talk to experts in the area to get a sense of that. That's a great example. This is hard to see, but so I worked with the Delaware Riverkeeper Network last year on a project. So they were, trying to get more members, that was kind of their audience, engage in a variety of advocacy projects, advocacy actions. And we kind of did a behavior mapping activity where we just mapped the effort that it would take people to do an action. This is really hard to see. These are like sticky notes. We mapped effort compared to impact. And so if it's, high impact but low effort to get people to do, like that's like your sweet spot, right? Because people are going to be more likely to do it, but it's going to have a strong impact. So something like getting people to, I don't know, there isn't really much in this category, but get something that has high impact, high effort. Might be getting people to talk to decision makers, or getting people to give a testimony at a hearing, something like that. So it's a helpful way to think through your behaviors. Oh, well, there you go. You can kind of see it. All right, and our third step is identifying your barriers and benefits. So in the last one, when you kind of narrowed down your specific action, you probably got to think about your audience pretty clearly, right? So whether it might be homeowners or people or farmers or people that live along the river, that wherever you might live or work, you want to be as specific as possible when it comes to defining your audience. It's really tempting when we're doing a project to say, but I want everyone to do the action. Like I want everyone in my watershed, or everyone that we work with, to do it. Super tempting. The thing is, those people, even within this room, are going to have a lot of different barriers, and I say benefits, which are like motivators. So if you could narrow it down, at least at first, that's going to be really helpful. So you define who they are, and you get to know, like I said, their barriers. So that's kind of what's preventing them from doing the behavior, and those can be real or perceived, right? A lot of the time, we're not going to do an action because we think that it's difficult. Like I'm working on a project now involved with food scrap composting, right? So getting people to put their food scraps into a bin. In this case, it's a city that's going to pick them up, and that's so really all that they do is put it in the bin and put their bin out with their trash and their recycling. But the barriers people have, can range from that just seems gross, like that's icky, I don't know, how do I do that? Or like, where do I put it? What do I do with it inside the house? And in that case, that's like a structural barrier, like you just need to give them a bin and then they have the bin in the house. If it's something like, I'm kind of grossed out by this, and that's like a different thing we need to get over. Benefits, so why should they do this? What do they care about? Are these people environmentally motivated? Are they more motivated by public health, or the health of their families, or the health of their children? Not everyone is environmentally motivated, so our default often is to be like, but this is good for the environment. If something other than that is going to get them to do the action, then focus on that, right? Like it doesn't always have to be the first message. Saving money, we often jump to, it's a little overrated. People might kind of get a quick action change, but usually in the long term it doesn't hold up. Concerns they have, past behaviors. What they've done before can have an impact on what they're willing to do now. Great, so this all sounds good, but how do we actually do that, right? How do we get this information? Basically, you just have to talk to people. And that can be as simple as intercept surveys, where you grab people coming out of a hardware store or someplace where you think your target audience might be. It can be interviews, you can set up focus groups, you can do surveys. That's kind of a lot of what I end up doing, is helping people develop surveys and understanding their audiences. Again, when I worked with the Delaware Riverkeeper, we did an online survey, but because the contact information they had was mostly mailing addresses, they also had some emails, we mailed out a postcard inviting people with like a short URL to complete a survey. We also emailed people if we had it, but it's a lot cheaper to do online than it is to mail it, and then you have to type in all the data and everything. Yeah.
What was your participation rate on the survey?
I thought I did write that down. It was.
Put you on the spot.
Yeah. No, we were good.
When I talk to someone about surveys, even if it's like a 5 or 10, if you get 5%, you're doing great, but then you're only hearing from 5%.
Yeah. So the thing with
And they're self-selected too.
you're gonna have. So right. So there's a few things. So I always encourage you to have gather more than one data point ideally when you're, don't just do surveys or don't just talk to people. If there's also looking at past research that has been done of similar behavior, similar audiences, kind of combining with that. I do have that data for you. I think it probably was around 7 or 8%, which it sounds low, but that is a normal, the whole thing is like if you look at your total target audience, you want to get a number, and there's like easy online tools for this. It's a calculation that you figure out what number can I get back that will show it's representative of my audience. And it's like not as big as you think it might be. So I think our audience was 15,000 or so, and we got under probably 700 or so responses, and that was enough to be representative of the audience. Yes.
What's the name of some of those tools? Like if you wanted to find that tool online, what would you Google?
If you just search for like online survey like representativeness or representative formula or something like that, if you email me, I can send you the one that I use.
Okay.
Basically, you just put in your number, you put in your confidence level that you're looking for, which is like usually 95% confidence is what you want at least, and 5% margin of error. This is like getting into the weeds a little bit, but like this survey stuff, I agree, it can be like overwhelming, and you don't want to waste your time if you're not going to get a good sample. Question?
How long did folks have to respond to your survey?
How long did we, guys, I'm trying to think of the details. I think, no, it's all right, and I have all this in the report, so I'm happy to send it to you guys. I think we had it open for like 5 or 6 weeks. And we, it was online, so we kind of monitored it. And the big thing with surveys, if we want to talk about surveys, happy to talk about this all day, giving people an upfront heads up that it's coming is great, because then they know to look for it. Sending that into them like up to 3 or 4 times if they haven't completed it. I know that can seem like obnoxious, but like there's a method called Dillman's method. It's this researcher that does a ton of survey work, and so that's kind of his thing. It's like you send it once, you send it again like 2 weeks later, and again to those who still didn't respond, and then if you can thank them in some way afterwards, it's always going to be, you'll get a good response rate. And I mean, the most important thing aside from getting response rate is how you rate those questions. So if it's something you haven't done, there's lots of resources on it, but connecting with a local school or university, there's always students that are looking for projects like that. You want to make sure your questions are not leading, or that you're getting at what you want. And I'm happy, again, I do a lot of this kind of stuff, so if anyone has questions, let me know. But you got to do it. You can't jump forward without knowing more about your audience. Okay, so we're at for 10:50. Geez Louise. Oh no, we have till 11:15. Okay, I was thinking 11. Developing strategies. Okay, this is the fun part. So this is where we really get into, now that we know our audience, we know what's motivating them, we know what's discouraging them, we can come up with our barriers. So we're come up with our strategies. Utilizing specific behavior change tools, we're going to kind of develop these strategies. So these tools provide information, not just information, but motivation to do the behavior. So specifically, you're going to come up with tools that are, so we want to discourage a behavior. We want to discourage littering, right? That's a behavior no one likes. We want to make the barriers greater, so make it harder for people to litter, and you want to decrease the benefits. So any benefits that people have from littering, you want to make, de-emphasize those. So what are we talking about? So here are this is about 9, if I can count correctly. These are 9 strategies that I've done a lot of research on. When I was a grad student, I went to grad school at University of Michigan. We worked with the Chesapeake Bay Trust. I don't know if anyone's familiar with them, but they're based in Annapolis, so obviously Chesapeake Bay based, but they are a grant-making organization. And they wanted to develop a new grant program that specifically got at people to develop behavior change programs. It was part of their community outreach and engagement grant. And they still have it as a component. But in order to do that, they brought on us, graduate students, to kind of understand their audience, people that were potential grantees, and understand what did they know about behavior change, what programs were they already doing, like where did they need support and help. One thing that came out of this is that we created this strategy guide that helped them, that took them through those specific strategies I had listed, and how to use them. And that the site, or the strategy guide, I have some examples of it up here. Folks, I can pass this around if people want to look at it. It's also on my website, so you're happy to, you can download it for free as well. So I'll just pass it if you want to look at it. If you want to have a look and pass it around. So I'm going to go over 4 of these now. And again, if there's more that you're curious about, let me know. And then after each of these, like I said, I'm going to ask you for examples, because I imagine whether you realize this, think of it as a behavior change tool or not, you may be doing some of this in your programming already. All right, so this first one is feedback. This is pretty self-explanatory, basically letting people know how they're doing. So giving people information about their level or need for improvement or kind of level of success in regards to a specific behavior. Okay, so this could be as simple as, telling trash cleanup volunteers how many bags of trash they collected this week compared to last week, or perhaps how well they did compared to another group, right? So you can compare people to themselves, to others. It can be individual, it can be group. There's a lot of possibilities with feedback. But a challenge with it is that it can backfire. And that usually happens when someone is already doing really well, right? So like this example here, this is from the energy field. There's this company called O-Power that kind of creates, this is like an excerpt from an energy bill you might get like from your gas and energy company. And they'll give you information about how you're using energy compared to your neighbors, all your neighbors, and compared to your most efficient neighbors. Right, so in this case, like, oh, I'm doing pretty good, I got a smiley face. I'm not doing quite as good as my most efficient neighbors. That makes you want to kind of use less energy. Problem did come up and they've fixed it, but what happens if you're up here? What do you think might happen?
You get lazy.
You get lazy and you end up using more because you're like, I'm doing good, I'm all right. Also, with whether we think about it or not, people want to kind of be more in the norm. So this seems like very kind of, I don't think people usually take that in, but without thinking about it, you actually end up, again, using more because you actually want to normalize. What they did to fix this is kind of crazy. It's hard to see on here. But the addition of the double smiley face for people who were great, that like fixed it. So they didn't use this great good thing to start, I think. But when they added, like, you're doing great and you get 2 smiley faces, people were like, oh, like that was like an extra award. That was like all that it took. Isn't that like, it's so funny? But it's true. I mean, like, they need to be told that they're doing well, and that's like a good thing, right? Like that's where they should be. Similar example, this just came out, this study, I thought this was pretty interesting. So this is, I do a lot of zero waste projects. So like composting, recycling, and that kind of thing. And so they did a similar thing here with local neighborhoods, showing how they were composting. So I think they were probably measuring, this is for curbside composting, so they could measure how much each neighborhood was composting. And again, I mean, they're pointing out here your neighborhood. They didn't use the smiley face thing, so I'd be curious to see how it happened if you live in South Sundale, if you're above average. But again, it's nice to give feedback, and this is like a creative way to compare it to other people. We'll talk about social norms in a minute too, which is also a strategy you can use. Okay, so needed frequently. Benefits, like I said, it works best for those that are below a set goal, which is usually like, if we're trying to encourage a behavior, like they're probably already below what you're trying to get them to do, because if they were already doing it, you wouldn't be working on it. So that's not usually a problem. Tips, giving the feedback, just like training your dog. I have a dog. Giving the treat immediately after he sits is going to be more effective than waiting an hour or whatever. Not always possible with people, but basically you just need to associate your feedback with what they did. and frame it positively if you can. You know, if people are constantly like below where you want them to be, so we're talking about like energy use and they're constantly low, don't talk about, maybe it's not best to compare them to other people. Maybe you want to give feedback compared to themselves. So it's like, well, compared to last month, you saved this much more energy. So kind of being creative, because again, like I talked about the negative emotion thing, like people just really don't respond well to be constantly being shot down and getting negative feedback. So finding a balance. Anyone use feedback in any other programs? Doesn't have to be like these charts. It can be, you know, verbal feedback or no one?
Yeah, we collect. How much we use, I'm not always sure, but we collect.
Collect what?
Feedback on programs.
Okay. Do you give it back to people?
Yeah.
Or you're getting feedback from them?
We're getting feedback from program participants.
Okay. So you're receiving that after, so sort of like an evaluation piece. Okay, good. Anyone else? No? All right. Well, you can think about how to incorporate it. Anyone have ideas of how they could use it? All right then. I know you guys could. Come up to me afterwards. Let me know what you came up with. All right, so our next one is stories. It seems simple enough. You know, I mean, when we usually talk about stories, we think about kids sitting around a classroom, or we think of it as more kind of a childish thing. But the thing is, research shows that people take in information from stories much better than they do from lists or even narratives. You know, kind of framing thing in the story context, even for all you scientists out there. Like I think I am probably more data driven, and many of you are, but most people, stories is going to get that hook a little better. So people connect with stories. It also allows for a personal experience where that may not otherwise be possible, right? So something like experiencing, being in a rainforest, or experiencing the long-term effects of climate change down the line. Like there's some things that we are not in the present, and you can only tell through stories. One challenge of stories is that you do need to know your audience, right? You want to make sure that when you're telling your story, it's relatable, you're getting at those barriers and motivators that we talked about earlier, and that we're really kind of getting that embedded, that environmental message in there. How do we do it? I mean, yeah, I think it can be hard. I think these 4 ideas, these 4 bullet points here can kind of really get you into that mindset. So the first one is you want to create, a problem solving and solution in your story. So it doesn't have to be like I'm writing this wonderful story. Like this video I was going to show you is just like it's just a cartoon. There's no words. There's some music. It's just a cartoon showing this guy littering and kind of following that litter through the storm drain and out into the ocean. So having a problem-solving element is going to be really important. So you want to not only have something that they're going to solve, but there has to be a solution at the end. So kind of fitting that component into it. Characterization. So if you can have one particular character, if you would have seen Storm or Sam, it's just like an everyday guy that he's waiting at the bus stop and he, is thinking about what would happen if I dropped my bottle of water, into the storm drain. So kind of having someone who's relatable. A nice way to do it for people who are kind of more that data-driven is to look to your audience and kind of, maybe there's someone in your community that really stands out, and just something as simple as getting like a few quotes from them, from their experience, can make it feel more story-like, more personal. Actually, I have an example here. Go away. I was working on this project in Palo Alto, it's like Silicon Valley area. We created this, this was a composting project, and we created this character called Zach Zero. I worked with some other consultants, and this was based on, we knew, people in this area are like pretty techy, like kind of nerdy. So this kind of character sort of fits with that. But what we did for a pamphlet we created was these are actually people who live in the neighborhood, who live in Palo Alto, and we got quotes from them about kind of tips for composting, right? So I was saying someone's about it being like stinky, right? So keep the smelliest scraps in the fridge or freezer until collection day. So it's not exactly a story, but it kind of has that characterization piece. It has that social norms piece. It has like, these people are just like me, and here's how to get over those barriers I learned in my survey that you have. So it can be, and this again also gets into social norms, which we will talk about in a minute. So being concrete, so I know like we want to give all the information all the time, but like just, you know, being as specific as possible, keeping it short. People, if they want more information from you, like give a link to your website, or a, you know, a report. But most people don't want all of that information. And fun fact, like we can only take in, was it 5 plus or minus 2, like chunks of information at a time, right? So if you have a pamphlet about, you know, stream restoration or something, and you just have like 1,000 bullet points, like people you physically can't, you're not going to be able to comprehend all of that at once. So keep it simple, provide more later. And then imagery. You know, so the video is obviously a great example of imagery because it's literally using images, but kind of giving people as descriptive examples as possible is always going to be better. So again, you don't have to be a wonderful writer or a storyteller, but kind of bringing in that personal, individualized component is going to be helpful. Has anyone used stories in their programs? No?
I don't know. I'm a civil engineer, and when I start talking about like square feet and water quality volume, a lot of people will glaze over. And instead, you know, I talk about habitat creation, and you know, for example, I'll say, yeah, the monarch butterflies came, you know, and it's like something that people grab onto, other than, yeah, there's X many native species, including this species, you know, that no one really grasps, like latches onto it. But if you kind of like have a small anecdote, like, oh, there's a bog turtle there spotted like 2 seasons ago or something, then folks.
Exactly, and have a picture of that turtle, or have it present there. I mean, it's not like dumbing it down, guys. It's like, you know, it's making it more personable, more relatable. And again, if people want that information, the extra information, they can get it. But know your audience, right? And you want to speak to them in a way that's that not just that they can. It's not about understanding. It's about like, is this interesting or relatable to them? Okay. Anyone else? Yeah.
What about stories that are negative? Because if a motivator is, this is contaminating your community, look, here's 2 examples. And so I've often, unfortunately, had to use negative stories. Like, and these 2 farmers lost everything. All of their cows died. And this is why we want to make a change. Or this woman is so hypersensitive now, her face looks like she was whipped with poison ivy when she's near this contamination. And definitely the photos too. People are like, oh. But you know, so you try to aim toward positive, but sometimes our issues, especially in environmental circles, are really negative.
No, I totally hear that. So yeah, so it's kind of alluding to this earlier. So the thing, if you feel like this is information we have to get out in that, you know, in that way, you just need to give people some sort of solution, something tangible that they can do. I mean, you're going to them for a reason, but you don't want to leave them with a sense of like hopelessness. You want to make them feel like there's something that they can do. So if you're telling them that, then the next thing is, but you can do this to make this a little bit better. So just, so kind of, that's almost like ending on a positive-ish note, but it's just that if people feel helpless, it's like climate change. Like that feels so big and so terrible, like, oh, may as well not do anything. What I do doesn't make a difference. Like that's like not what we want to leave people with, right? All right, so I'm running, got about 7-8 minutes. So our last, second last strategy is social norms. So this is demonstrating the importance of a behavior. You can kind of break this down into 2 ways. It can be considered what is either socially acceptable or unacceptable, right? So here wearing a fake Rolex is socially unacceptable. Or, you know, something like parking in, it could be either explicit or implicit. So explicit is like you're telling someone that it's not cool. You know, something's like everything else, something we know, like you don't take up 2 parking spots in a parking lot, okay? So socially acceptable or unacceptable, or what the norm is, right? What we think most people are doing, right? So in this case, this ad is emphasizing that most people, despite they're probably trying to break a perception, most people don't drop litter, right? So when you're focusing on social norms, you want it to be both what most people are doing, so what's perceived to be or what is what the majority of people are doing, and also socially acceptable.
About threats.
What's that?
How about threats?
How about threats?
Threats, looking at that last slide.
Oh, I know the fining thing. They say we will prosecute. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, so that we will prosecute. That, remember that graph I showed you? Like that's getting those people at that far right that are like not going to change unless they get a fine. So I'm not necessarily. It's up to you, kind of what you need to do. Again, if you know your audience and they say, well, I'm going to litter unless I get fined, then okay. The problem with that is usually local governments can't actually like fine every person, so usually it's not enforced. So the challenge comes with what about when we have a norm that we don't want people to be doing, right? So say we want people to stop littering cigarette butts, but everywhere you go, there's cigarette butts everywhere. So if there actually is trash there, or whatever it might be, you probably need to focus on someone in your community or some sort of champion that people look up to, and get that person to speak up about it. If it's just a perception, which kind of to me this seems like this is probably just a perception, because you don't want to publish something that's not true. Like if actually everyone litters, then you wouldn't want to say that. But they probably did a survey or something. They found out 75% of people don't litter, or 75% of people throw away their trash. Then you publish statistics that say, hey, I know you think everyone does this thing, or don't say that, but X people don't actually do it. So you want to kind of create this norm that this is what we do, this is the cool thing to do, and this is what everyone's doing. So the cool thing about norms is that it's self-sustaining. So the more you have people doing a behavior, like I see a lot of reusable water bottles here, like, I guess there are some they have paper cups out there, but some circles you're in, if everyone that you work with brings a reusable water bottle to work and you show up with a Starbucks cup, that's not going to be the norm. Like you're going to change your behavior based on that. So it's self-sustaining. And again, you want to make sure that the norm you're promoting aligns with the descriptive norm. I'm not going to ask for examples for sake of time because I have one more to get through, unless someone has a really awesome burning example. Okay. Last one's commitment. So that's using verbal or written agreements to encourage people to adopt a behavior, right? So this is basically a pledge, which I know we've seen or used before. Quick examples: Meatless Monday, it's from the University of Michigan. They gave people like a pin too to show that they were pledging to eat less meat. This is using fewer water bottles. Cool thing about this, they have people sign their name, which has an added benefit of people feeling committed to something. And then this is cool. I worked with these guys a little bit. This is this Clear Choices Clean Water program. They actually did it here in Delaware River Watershed. And they have a bunch of different pledges. They have a website. Check it out. I worked with the woman who started it. But they, based on different actions, this one here was for fertilizer use. They had this map on their website. So if you take the pledge, it then shows a pinpoint of where. So that's like social norms too, right? Because it's like if I live, it doesn't work as well if you live somewhere where there's no one there. But if you, live in the middle of the watershed and you see all these people sign that pledge, that can be really effective. So pledges are great. Commitment's great because it's cheap. It's pretty easy to do. It's been shown by research to have both like a quick, like short-term change, like switching out your incandescents for LED, but also long-term change, like biking to work 3 days a week. So it's been shown to be effective for both. Group is less effective than individual, so ideally you make commitments as a person, not on behalf of a group. And then some tips, you want it to be an active process. So if they can write their name, like I said, or sign it. And again, kind of the reminder piece is really important. That's kind of like the feedback. So you don't want to have like a tabling event, have someone sign a pledge, and then go home and never hear from you again. The whole thing is that you've got to make sure, you got to come back to them, send them a reminder, send them an email. to let them know they made the commitment. Has anyone done pledges before? Yeah? For what kind of action?
It was a getting out and vote,
Yeah.
you were canvassing and you had them write their name on, some paper saying, I will come out. And vote
Yeah,
in this
exactly.
county on this date."
Exactly. It's like it ingrains in people's minds. I know I am just about out of time, so our last two steps. So once you create your strategies, so you test out some of these strategies, you pick them out, you then go back to your audience and you pilot that. Pilot, right? So I don't want to give it to everyone in my whole target audience because it's not 100% going to work the first time depending on how you do it, right? So you want to ideally break it into two groups, a test group and a control group within your audience that's smaller than your audience, and test it out. Evaluate before and after to see if it achieved your desired target action. Again, evaluating the importance, judging if your program worked, can inform future programs, it can help you make improvements, can help you get funding, right? So we need to do evaluation. And it's not until that pilot works that I do my broad scale implementation. So you may have to go back a couple of times and rework what you're doing until you kind of do it sort of widespread. But it's super, super important to do that evaluation piece. Final thoughts. Behavior change is multifaceted. It's not, human behavior is icky, right? Like it's not straightforward, and that can be really frustrating again for people who have, more of a scientific background to kind of think not in terms of behavior, because that's kind of, again, like that's my background, and I made a shift into the social piece because I saw how important it was, the impact that people have on the environment. Like that's everything, right? So be patient. It can take a long time. Habits can take, the last study I saw about this was 63 days. So, it can take a couple months or longer for a behavior to really stick, a habit to stick. This framework I gave you is a framework. So ideally, you don't just pick and choose from different steps. Ideally, you walk along that. You learn from your audience. You define your audience. You create your strategies. You test your strategies. It doesn't have to be exact, but following it is going to be a good idea. And then lastly, this one, I have to tell myself this all the time, don't assume what motivates you motivates your audience, right? You are not your audience. You're probably already doing the behavior you're trying to motivate. So make sure you get to know them first before moving forward. All right, so I'll be around for more questions. You probably need to get moving, but thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.